What's really interesting is that the Egyptologists were certain that they would find Akhenaten behind that tomb, and they didn't.
1907, archaeologists cracked open a tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings and found a skeleton that made no sense. The bones belonged to someone connected to one of the most powerful royal lines in history. But when scientists ran the DNA, the results pointed to something that had been hiding in plain sight for 3,000 years. A secret so uncomfortable that the people who came after this pharaoh tried to erase every trace of him, and they almost succeeded. The pharaoh who looked like no one else. Walk through any major museum with an ancient Egypt collection and you will eventually find a statue that stops you cold. It looks Egyptian, but not quite. The face is long and narrow, with heavy lips and slanted eyes. The neck stretches out like something pulled too far. The hips flare wide, the belly rounds outward, and even the chest carries what look like breasts. If you cover the name on the base, most people looking at it cannot tell whether it shows a man or a woman. This is Akhenaten, the 18th dynasty pharaoh who ruled Egypt from roughly 1353 BCE to 1336 BCE. And for over a century, nobody could agree on what they were actually looking at. Egyptian royal art, before his reign, followed rules that had been in place for more than 1,000 years. Pharaohs were shown as strong, upright, muscular, and perfectly proportioned. They all looked basically the same, because that was the point. The king was not just a man, he was a symbol, and the symbol had a specific look. Sometimes, when a new pharaoh took the throne, artists would simply chisel the old king's name off an existing statue and carve the new name in. The body did not need to change, because the body was not supposed to be the real body. It was the idea of kingship in stone. Then Akhenaten came along and ordered his artists to do something completely different. He told them to carve the king as he truly appears. That is the phrase that appears in records from the period. And what appeared on the temple walls of his new city was unlike anything Egypt had produced before or would produce again. A figure with spindly arms, thick thighs, a swollen belly, an elongated skull, and a body that seemed to blend male and female into one form. Early Egyptologists who first encountered these images in the 19th century were genuinely unsure whether they depicted a man or a woman. This led to a debate that, even now, hasn't exactly stopped. A king who tore down everything. Before anyone could figure out what Akhenaten looked like, they had to reckon with what he did. And what he did was extraordinary, even by the standards of ancient history. He was born Amenhotep IV, second son of Amenhotep III, who had ruled over one of the most prosperous periods in Egyptian history. The younger son was not supposed to inherit the throne. His older brother was the heir, but the older brother died, and Amenhotep IV became pharaoh. Within a few years, he had begun dismantling nearly everything Egypt stood for. By his 5th year on the throne, he had changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten, and declared that the sun disk, the Aten, was the only true god. Egypt had worshipped dozens of gods for well over 1,000 years. Amun was the chief among them, and the priests of Amun had grown extraordinarily powerful, controlling vast amounts of land and wealth that rivaled the pharaoh's own treasury. Akhenaten ordered every temple dedicated to Amun closed. He had the name of Amun hacked off walls and monuments across the country. Workers chiseled the god's name out of inscriptions in tombs and temples all over Egypt. The erasure was thorough and violent. He then abandoned Thebes, the traditional capital, and marched the entire royal court roughly 200 miles north to a stretch of empty desert on the east bank of the Nile. There, in what is now called Amarna, he built a whole new city from scratch in under 2 years. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. The temples had no roofs, so sunlight could pour directly onto the altars. There were no dark inner sanctuaries where priests could perform their rituals away from public view. Everything was open, everything was lit, and at the center of it all was Akhenaten, declaring himself the sole link between the Aten and humanity. No priest could approach the god, only the king. This was not something one could even call a religious adjustment. The best way to describe it is a complete demolition of the existing world. And the man doing the demolishing looked, in every piece of art produced during his reign, like nothing that had ever sat on the Egyptian throne before him. Was it art or was it medicine? So why did he look so strange in all those statues? Well, two very different camps of experts have been arguing about this for generations. The first camp says the art was symbolic, not literal. Akhenaten's god, the Aten, was described in temple texts and in the famous great hymn to the Aten as the mother and father of all humankind. The god was understood to carry no gender. It was the source of all life and therefore all things. If you were the earthly representative of that god, the argument goes, you would want your body in art to reflect the same idea. You would show yourself as containing both male and female, as the god does. The androgynous appearance was a theological statement carved into stone, not a medical chart. John Darnell, an Egyptologist at Yale University, has argued that Akhenaten's strange appearance in art was deliberately chosen to associate him with the creator god who existed before gender did. The second camp, made up largely of physicians and medical historians, looks at those same statues and sees a checklist of symptoms. They look at the wide hips, enlarged chest, protruding belly, elongated skull, the spindly limbs, and they start naming conditions. Marfan's syndrome was suggested early on, a genetic disorder that causes very long limbs, a tall and thin frame, and an elongated face. But Marfan does not cause the feminized body that the statues show, and it was largely set aside. Froelich syndrome was proposed next, which causes fat redistribution that produces a feminized appearance in men. But Froelich syndrome also causes sterility, and Akhenaten fathered at least 6 children. That theory collapsed too. The theory that gained the most medical traction came from Erwin Braverman, a dermatology professor at Yale School of Medicine. Looking only at surviving artwork from across the entire 18th dynasty, Braverman proposed 2 inherited genetic conditions: aromatase excess syndrome, which causes the male body to produce too much estrogen, leading to breast development and wide hips, and craniosynostosis, in which the skull bones fuse too early, forcing the head to grow in an elongated shape. Both theories are still alive, and neither one could be settled without DNA, KV55, and the skeleton nobody could identify. In 1907, an American archaeologist named Theodore Davis funded an excavation in the Valley of the Kings that turned up a tomb with no name on it. It had been broken into and resealed in antiquity. Inside, beneath a gilded wooden coffin that had been deliberately damaged and stripped of its identifying inscriptions, lay a skeleton. The bones were in poor condition. The initial team who opened the tomb left a record that later researchers described as messy and incomplete. But over the following decades, multiple scientists examined what remained. The skeleton was clearly male. The skull was long and narrow. The jaw was pronounced, and the bone structure was slender. It matched, in general terms, the body shown in Akhenaten's statues. The tomb received the number KV55, and the question of who was inside it became one of the longest-running arguments in Egyptology. Some researchers said the bones were too young to be Akhenaten. Akhenaten reigned for 17 years and had fathered children within his first year on the throne, meaning he had to have been at least in his 30s when he died. But several studies of the skeleton's dental wear and bone development put the age at death somewhere between the early 20s and the mid-20s. That was too young for Akhenaten. Some Egyptologists proposed the body was instead a figure called Smenkhkare, a short-lived pharaoh who ruled briefly after Akhenaten and died young. Then, in 2010, a team led by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass published results in the Journal of the American Medical Association from 2 years of genetic testing on 16 royal mummies. They used DNA extracted from bone tissue to build a 5-generation family tree. The KV55 KV-55 mummy, they concluded, was the genetic father of Tutankhamun. The KV-55 mummy's Y chromosome matched those of Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun, placing it squarely inside the direct male line of the 18th dynasty. But that's not the end of the story, because things get a little bit complicated upon further examination of the DNA. What the DNA actually said. The 2010 JAMA study was reported in newspapers and on television as a definitive discovery. Akhenaten had been found, and his parents were siblings. The mystery was solved, but the reality was more complicated. The Hawass team concluded that the KV-55 mummy was probably Akhenaten, and that his parents were almost certainly Amenhotep III and Queen Tiaye, meaning they were father and son in the royal line. They also concluded that the mother of Tutankhamun was a woman labeled only as the younger lady, found in a separate tomb, and that she was a full sibling of KV-55. The DNA showed that Tutankhamun's parents were full siblings, brother and sister, both children of the same mother and father. But multiple other researchers immediately challenged whether KV-55 was actually Akhenaten at all. Anthropologist Eugen Strohal conducted a comprehensive, separate analysis of the skeleton and concluded the man was no older than 22 when he died, which is far too young to be Akhenaten given his known reign length. The Hawass team had cited spinal degeneration to argue for an older age of 35 to 45, but critics pointed out that a single indicator is not enough to override multiple other age markers, all pointing younger. The identity of KV-55 remains officially unresolved. It could be Akhenaten. It could be the shorter-lived Smenkhkare. Scientists agree on the DNA connection to the royal line and to Tutankhamun, but they disagree on the name. What the DNA did establish firmly was that Tutankhamun's parents were full biological siblings. That is not in dispute. And the 2010 study also settled one of the oldest medical debates about Akhenaten, and that was the fact that the CT scans of the family mummies found no physical evidence of Marfan syndrome, no craniosynostosis, and no sign of the bone abnormalities that would have produced the extreme body shape shown in the statues, which means the medical disease theory, at least the versions that had been most popular, did not survive contact with the actual bodies. So what was really going on with those statues? The answer nobody wanted to accept. The CT scan results gave Egyptologists something they rarely get, a clean answer to a decades-long question. And the answer was that the extreme body in the statues was not a medical condition. Akhenaten was not physically deformed in the way the art suggested. Kara Cooney, an Egyptologist and professor at UCLA who studies the 18th dynasty, said after the 2010 results that if KV-55 was indeed Akhenaten's father, then the DNA findings showed the pharaoh did not suffer from the physical deformities suggested by his statues. The art was symbolic, which brings the story back to the religious revolution. Akhenaten declared his god, the Aten, to be the mother and father of all life. He declared himself the sole connection between that god and the rest of humanity. To make that message visible and permanent, he had artists carve him not as the standard muscle-bound ideal of Egyptian kingship, but as something that reflected the god itself, a body that contained both male and female, strength and softness, and king and creator. Every wall in his city of Amarna became a piece of theological propaganda carved in stone. The Amarna style was one of the most deliberate visual campaigns in the ancient world. When he died and his successors came to power, they understood exactly how powerful those images were, which is why they worked so hard to destroy them. Workers were sent to chip his name off monuments. His city was abandoned and eventually dismantled, its stones recycled into other buildings. His name was left off official king lists for centuries. He was referred to only as the enemy or the criminal of Akhenaten in some records. The people who came after him wanted him forgotten so completely that even his statues could not remain. But they failed, and the statues survived. And the DNA answered a question 3,000 years in the making. The boy left behind. Tutankhamun became pharaoh at around 8 or 9 years old. He died at roughly 18 or 19. In between, he undid nearly everything his father had done. The temples of Amun were reopened and the old gods were restored. The city of Amarna was abandoned and the court moved back south. Tutankhamun also changed his own name, which had originally been Tutankhaten in honor of the Aten, dropping that reference entirely and replacing it with Amun, the god his father had tried to erase. The restoration was deliberate and thorough. Akhenaten's revolution was being walked back in real time by his own son. But the DNA and the CT scans told another story running underneath the political one. Tutankhamun was born with a cleft palate. He had a club foot, with his left foot rotated and twisted inward, making a normal walking pattern impossible. The bones of his left foot also showed signs of a vascular necrosis, a condition where bone tissue dies because blood supply is cut off. The arch of his right foot was flattened, likely from years of compensating for the left. His spine showed a mild curvature. More than 130 canes were found in his tomb, some worn smooth from regular use. DNA extracted from his femur showed the presence of the Plasmodium falciparum parasite, which causes the most severe and dangerous form of malaria. The researchers concluded that malaria, combined with a bone fracture in his left thigh that had become infected, most likely caused his death. How much of this was tied to his parents being full siblings? The honest answer is that genetics cannot say for certain in any individual case. What genetics does say is that when two full siblings have a child together, the probability of that child inheriting two copies of the same harmful recessive gene rises dramatically compared to unrelated parents. Tutankhamun had a cluster of inherited and developmental conditions that showed up across multiple systems of his body at once: his feet, spine, palate, and his immune response to malaria. Whether inbreeding caused them directly, made existing conditions worse, or was unrelated to some of them is still a subject of genuine scientific debate. But the pattern across the whole royal family is hard to ignore. The dynasty that destroyed itself. Tutankhamun died without a living heir. He and his wife, Ankhesenamun, who was his half-sister, had 2 daughters together. Both were stillborn. The mummified remains of both infants were found in his tomb and have been studied. The first showed signs of spinal problems, so neither survived. When Tutankhamun died, the direct male line of the 18th dynasty died with him. The dynasty that had produced Akhenaten, one of the most radical thinkers in the ancient world, and Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh in modern memory, ended not with conquest or plague or invasion, but with the failure of a bloodline to continue. Inbreeding had been practiced in the Egyptian royal family for generations before Tutankhamun, and it would continue in the dynasties that followed, all the way through to the Ptolemaic period, where Cleopatra famously married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. The logic behind it was not ignorance, but theology. To them, the king was divine, so divine blood had to stay within the family. To marry outside the bloodline was to dilute something sacred. Every generation that repeated the pattern raised the genetic odds against the next one, not dramatically in any single generation, but cumulatively in the accumulation of shared mutations and narrowing variation that modern genetics can now read in bones. What the DNA ultimately showed was not that Akhenaten was some alien figure or biological monster, as decades of tabloid headlines suggested. It was that a system of belief, held sincerely and maintained with total confidence by the most powerful people on Earth at the time, had biological consequences that the people inside it had no way to see coming and no framework to understand, even if they had. The statues that confused everyone for so long were not showing a disease, but theology in its crudest form. The disease was somewhere else entirely, written into the genes of the children born from that theology, generation after generation. So, quick one, if the DNA had never been tested, would we still think Akhenaten was some kind of alien or half-human god? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please click on the next one on your screen.